Gradually, he blinked his eyelids a few times and then pulled slightly away from Giselle in order to shake his head. What happened? His legs felt weak and the brunette initially seemed to be at a loss for words to respond to him. It seemed as though he had no memory of what had just occurred, as evidenced by the confused look on his face. There was no time to ponder on the perplexities of his inhuman outburst though, for neither he nor any of the others who just seemed relieved to see that he had returned to normal. And the reason could be found still rampaging in the ocean, just a very short distance away. With another loud wail, the massive creature turned once again and swung its tail downward. While Jesse, James and Meowth initially seemed relieved that Ash had calmed down, their momentary salvation was cut short as the gargantuan tail went right toward them and smashed against the cliffside they had been clinging to. Thankfully for them, the tail smash did not crush them. Unfortunately for them, however, it did launch all three of them sky high, speeding away into the dark of the nighttime atmosphere. In a fortunate twist of fate though, the uproarious commotion currently underway deafened and drowned out the rocket trio's annoying shout of blasting off AGAAAIN. As they disappeared into the night sky with not so much as a twinkle or gleam left of them to be seen. After a short time, the creature's violent thrashing gradually began to slow and lessen until, at last, it halted completely. Everyone was left to stand and stare with trepidation and anxious concern as the mysterious Pokémon remained still for a time and cast its glowing blue eyes upon the surrounding area. To the great regret of all present, it slowly turned around and began wading back out to sea again. A mixture of fear, pain and mistrust having replaced the curiosity and innocent naivety it had earlier displayed. No. Wait. Please. Bill called out with a raised, pleading hand. Pokémon, don't go. We weren't the ones who were trying to hurt you, please come back. His words accomplished little though, the creature refusing to turn around or give heed as it continued to depart. Brock, Misty and Giselle watched with sorrowful expressions as the great Pokémon began to disappear into the night. Ash, however, pushed himself away from Giselle and almost immediately fell to his knees. His entire body felt incredibly weak from his earlier outburst, but even still, he utterly refused to let anything stop him. Ash, Giselle tried to say just as he pushed himself back up onto his feet, panting and sweating from effort, as he began stumbling toward the edge of the cliff. I'm not gonna let it end like this, he called back through heavy respirations. I won't let that innocent Pokémon be scarred from what Team Rocket did. His friends and Bill watched him in surprise as Ash struggled and stumbled to the very edge of the cliff. Then, just as the creature was about to vanish into the fog, Ash fell flat on his stomach upon the ground, half hanging off the cliff with his right hand extended out toward the retreating Pokémon. Wait. No sooner did the shout leave his lips and his right palm suddenly erupted with pure white light. The bright, powerfully radiating energy soon encompassed the entirety of his prone form and became so all-consuming it almost hurt to look at him. His friends initially went to run toward him, but Bill called out to them with an extended arm. No, wait. Let's see what happens. While not up to the present time having had any positive experiences when it came to Ash and strange energies, his friends nonetheless heeded Bill and did nothing. Being relegated to naught but standing and wearily watching, hoping dearly that he did not lose control again, they waited with incredibly bated breath. The white energy swirling around Ash seemed to focus in the greatest concentration within his palm before, suddenly, it shot out of his hand like lightning across the waters of the ocean. The ethereal energy came in contact with the mysteried Pokémon just as its head was about to disappear beneath the waves and coalesced around it, thereby stopping the large creature mid-step. It was the strangest thing really, an out-of-body experience. As though one's entire self was being separated from the physical anchor of their mortal form and being cast into the great expanse of the worldly energies around them. That is exactly what Ash experienced, as it felt like he was being yanked from his body and thrust across the ocean in spirit form, heading straight toward the motionless Pokémon. Just before his incorporeal form made contact with the giant creature, he noticed the same bright light around him now fully encompassing the massive Pokémon as well. On instinct, he brought his arms up to prepare for the impact he knew was coming, and then everything faded into nothing. In the blink of an eye, Ash returned to himself and found that he was floating, literally, in midair. He glanced around and had not the foggiest idea where he was. And for quite sensible reason. The realm, for lack of a better word, in which he found himself in was not really distinguishable, nor did it have any defining characteristics. This was mainly because there was actually no solid, physical form to anything he saw. Everything was mostly comprised of strange, swirling, cosmic-looking energies. Ash looked down and noticed that he himself was cloaked in a white veil of energy. Very similar, in his opinion, to what had shrouded him back when he had those mysterious connections with Pikachu or Bulbasaur and saw some of their individual pasts. Looking ahead, he was further stunned to see the very same giant Pokémon from earlier floating not all that far away from him, suspended just as he was in the cosmic dimension. Strangely enough, it was still cloaked in shadow, and that meant he still could not make out its true form or appearance as it towered above him. He also noticed that the mystery Pokémon was shrouded in two odd types of energy. The first was a kind of yellow, wavering energy that reminded him of what Bulbasaur and Pikachu looked like when he had connected with them before. However, there was also a bright red, far more furiously blazing energy around the massive creature. An aura in which Ash had not yet seen before and actually looked like it was the physical manifestation of anger or rage itself. As he processed what it was he was seeing, and had seen before, his mind started to slowly piece each perplexing bit of the mystery into place, one at a time. All the while, he thought to himself, "Let's see, the yellow energy is wavy and flickering, almost like it's maybe reflecting nervousness. And the red one looks more wild and fierce, like a fire getting out of control. It kind of looks angry almost. I wonder if maybe somehow they represent like emotions." Suddenly, his eyes went wide as he realized what was happening. Somehow, in a vast departure from before, he was actually speaking out loud, not merely thinking inwardly. Which was very different from when he had similar experiences with Pikachu and Bulbasaur. Moreover, unlike during those times, he also found it odd that he was not swapping or sharing memories with the giant creature before him. All of that led him to believe that, while indeed similar, the prior events he had taken part in were quite different than the current one. He then looked down at the still glowing mark on his right hand and clenched it into a fist. Okay. Ash knit his brows together in a thin line of concentration. I just need to keep trying to figure this thing out, whatever it is. Guess the best way to go about it is to just learn as I go. He then looked back at the massive Pokémon who was shrouded in shadow and immediately felt his heart go out to it. Compassion grew hot within him as he called up to it, his voice echoing in the formless dimension. I don't know how this happened and I don't know why we're both here, but I think it has something to do with me trying to help you. The unmoving and unspeaking Pokémon simply stared down at him as he continued. Listen. I know you've just been hurt and I know how badly betrayed you feel, I understand. But you also need to know that me and my friends, and Bill, the one who's been communicating with you, we had nothing to do with that attack on you. He held his arms out imploringly. It was a bad group of people named Team Rocket who attacked you, but they're gone now. We just wanted to get to meet you, to see you. And Bill has been waiting for a really long time to have that chance. A frown marred his face as the great emotion he felt in his heart was reflected in the intensity of the white aura around him that was attempting to penetrate the yellow and red energies shrouding the mystery Pokémon. Bill told us he thinks you've been alone for a really long time now and that you've just been searching for a friend, for someone to care for you. A look of great sincerity and passion came alighting into his eyes and was matched by the sincerity of his tone. Whoever you are, I promise that if you just come back to the lighthouse and give us all a chance, we won't let you down. You don't have to be alone anymore. For the longest time after that, if time even applied in that particular dimension, the gigantic and ambiguous Pokémon simply stared down at Ash as the boy's heartfelt words harmonized into the brightly glowing, white aura radiating from him like a star. Eventually, to his great relief and amazement, Ash saw the wavering yellow energy around the creature slowly beginning to dissipate. Then, in a manner akin to it, the angry red aura also started to subside until, finally, the Pokémon's massive form was now blanketed in the same calm, glowing white energy as Ash's own. As the moment of now serene tranquility washed over both of them, the much smaller human boy saw the towering Pokémon above him merely give a small nod of acknowledgement. A show of the creature's acceptance of his heartfelt plea. No sooner did this occur and Ash suddenly felt his consciousness being yanked upon, as if getting sucked backward by a vacuum. Just as he felt his awareness fading once again and the celestial, ethereal realm of brightly luminescent colors beginning to blur, Ash could have sworn he heard a soft voice whisper into his mind. You have done well, my chosen one. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX gaze upon the face of Giselle, who was looking down at him in concern as she held his head in her lap. Assuming that he was back in the normal realm of the physical world, Ash allowed his senses to come fully back online before, with a groan, he slowly sat up, Giselle helping to support his back and head in the process. "How are you feeling, Ash?" she asked in a manner of concern that was evident by the look on her face. I'm okay, just really tired," he answered wearily just as Pikachu hopped into his lap and nuzzled his trainer with a relieved sounding, "Pika Pie." Smiling and greeting his relieved Pokémon with an affectionate head scratch, Ash then looked up and saw Misty, Brock and Bill also standing around him with similar looks of concern for his well-being. However, the green-haired man in question flicked his gaze only momentarily toward the sea before, in the next breath, they all but popped out of his head in shock. "I don't believe it. Everyone, look there." Following his gaze, they saw, to their amazement, that the giant marine creature was now slowly returning, its massive form once again lumbering toward the lighthouse. "What did you do, Ash?" Misty's mouth gaped as she watched the massive Pokémon approach the cliffside. Indeed, Bill was, himself, in a state of both shock and overwhelming anticipation as he watched the mysterious Pokémon near them. "Truly it was a miracle, whatever you did. I honestly don't know." The black-haired boy grabbed at his sore head and shook it. While he knew what had occurred between he and the giant Pokémon in the strange metaphysical dimension, as well as what he said, he was still at a loss for how it happened. Finally, the mammoth creature in question came to stand right in front of the cliffside they were waiting at the edge of, a short distance away from the lighthouse. The majestic and hypnotizing Pokémon looked down on them with its eyes still glowing as bluish-white as ever. As they all stared upon it in awe and wonder, the moonlight at last had a break through the clouds above and allowed its lunar light to bathe them in its bright, dark dispelling glow. With the sudden illumination provided by the moonlight, the once mysterious Pokémon's identity was at long last revealed and it caused everyone to gasp in unison. Misty began in disbelief. "How?" Brock exclaimed, his voice laced with the dumbfounded incredulity he felt at seeing the impossible come to life before his very eyes. "But it's massive." Giselle blinked, her eyes nearly as wide as the moon itself. "All this time, the Pokémon I have been hoping to meet was Bill began in a wavering tone. Slowly getting to his feet, Ash walked up to the very edge of the cliff and stood before the massive creature whom he had just shared such an intimate emotional connection with. His eyes held the Pokémon's own and it too maintained his gaze, looking right down at him, while he spoke in a tone that was just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're a Dragonite. The titanic and no longer unknown creature merely nodded in response to his declaration, confirming his statement to be true. Although, with the moonlight now fully illuminating it, there was no need. Everyone could fully discern its features and there was no denying it most definitely belonged to the aforementioned species of pseudo-legendary Pokémon. How can it be a Dragonite though? Misty shook her head violently. It's too massive. Ash continued to stare up at the unequivocally unique Pokémon and replied without breaking his gaze. Remember Krabby. This is the same thing I think, but on a way larger scale. He shook his head. I don't know how but this Dragonite grew way bigger than any other member of its species is supposed to get. It's like a super exaggerated form of what happened to Krabby. That's so amazingly incredible. Giselle breathed in mystified wonder while Bill stepped forward as well and gave a bow to the giant Pokémon. Dragonite, for so long I have wanted to meet you and now I have achieved that goal. He finally looked up at it and held his arms out wide. You have honored me with your presence and I thank you for that, my friend. I only sincerely apologize that you were attacked by those horrible people all because I brought you here. I hope you can forgive me. The large Pokémon turned its gaze onto him and gave a soft, deep, reverberating coo that nearly seemed to shake the hillside. Draw. Understanding what had been said by the inflection in the Pokémon's voice, Bill smiled gratefully and once more dipped his head. Thank you so very much, Dragonite. You are a most gracious Pokémon indeed. The towering dragon type acknowledged his words with a nod and then turned its attention back to Ash, whom its focus was predominantly directed upon. Cooing softly, it leaned down until its massive face was level with both he and the cliffside. With Pikachu on his shoulder and staring up at the massive Pokémon in a similar state of awe, Ash closed the little distance still remaining between them and reached out, laying his hand ever so gently upon Dragonite's massive snout. Feeling slightly rough, wet and warm scales greeting his touch. As he very lightly began to stroke the huge creature's nose, Ash smiled at the soft coo of enjoyment it gave from his ministrations. See that, Dragonite? We're friends. I promise, no one like Team Rocket will ever hurt you again. As he shared the heartwarming moment with Dragonite, his friends and Bill watched and smiled, the outcome of the seemingly desperate situation much better than its anticipated end. After several long moments, Ash finally stepped back and felt a wave of fatigue pass over him again, the strain on his body from his earlier outburst having taken its toll. However, just as he went to stumble and fall down again from sheer weakness, much to the worry of the others as they rushed toward him, Dragonite surprised everyone by being the one to catch him instead. In a movement that was quicker than one would expect for its size, the colossal dragon type reached its massive hand up and very carefully caught Ash with just the tip of one of its digits. Ash, are you okay? His three friends called out in tandem, their concern mirrored by Bill as they surrounded him while Dragonite kept him safely from falling. Pikachu was still on his trainer's shoulder, worry quite evidently seen in the electric mouse's eyes for him. Yeah, I'm fine. He slowly managed to right himself while reaching up and grabbing onto one of Dragonite's long nails. Just really drained. Giselle rubbed his back gently. I think you need a good night's rest, Ash. He nodded again, agreeing with her sound logic as he looked up at Dragonite, who finally withdrew its hand seeing he was now stable. Well, Dragonite, it's really late and we're all exhausted. Will you still be here tomorrow if we go to bed now? With a soft nod of its massive head, the draconian seafarer gave a gentle-sounding coo in reply that relayed a positive affirmation. All right then guys, let's head off. I'm spent. Ash tried to give a smile of amusement but the fatigue he wore only made him look pityingly exhausted. Turning to them, Bill pointed toward the lighthouse while directing, if you go inside and past the entrance hall, to your left will be a door that leads into a small hallway. There are a couple of rooms that you can choose for yourselves if you wish, mine is the one at the end of the hallway. You are more than welcome to stay here, my friends. After saying their own farewells to Dragonite, Ash's friends prepared to head inside while he himself smiled up at the giant dragon type. Good night, Dragonite. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Pikachu. Pikachu also bade good night in his own way. However, Dragonite surprised them all by leaning down and pressing its large nose up against Ash, as if affectionately nuzzling him. While initially surprised at the gesture and nearly being knocked off his feet in the process, Ash smiled and wrapped his arms around what he could manage of the huge Pokemon's face. Even Pikachu I smiled and gave a pat to the ocean-dwelling dragon's snout. After witnessing the special connection that had occurred between them, neither his friends or Bill were surprised by what they were seeing. Though it did cause them all to smile at the tender scene in Bill's brilliant mind to begin considering something that no one else was at the present time. After their embrace of sorts had ended, Ash and the others went to go inside before Misty called back to Bill. "Aren't you coming too?" He shook his head. "Not quite yet, I'll be along shortly. First I would like to ask Dragonite a few questions that I have been absolutely dying to ask it for some time now." He then looked up at said Pokemon and beseeched it with another quick, polite head bow. "Would you mind terribly if I did so, Dragonite? I am just so enthusiastic to finally get to meet you that I don't think I'll be able to wait until tomorrow." Finding the eccentric human to be quite amusing, Dragonite actually gave a kindly eye smile and nodded, which caused a big smile to stretch across his lips. "Wonderful. Absolutely marvelous. These will be simple yes or not questions, so just shake your head or nod to give your answer." "Oh, this is so exciting." Ash and his friends shared a look of amusement between them before heading into the lighthouse, all while Bill began to rattle off questions as if each one were already rehearsed. "Right then. My first question would happen to be XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX already awake and ready to go. After taking turns freshening up in Bill's bathroom and preparing for a long day's travel, they all dressed quickly, packed their things and prepared to depart. When they stepped out into the morning sun, they immediately felt the cool breeze rolling up off the ocean as it blew across their faces, as well as the salt air wafting into their noses. There wasn't a cloud in the sky to boot, showing what a magnificent day it was shaping up to be. Looking ahead, they saw Bill sitting at the edge of the cliff talking to Dragonite, who had indeed stayed through the night. In daylight, they finally got a clear look at the especially unique Pokémon and in so doing, marveled at how gigantic it truly was. In every way the super-sized dragon type looked exactly like a normal Dragonite, only several times larger. As they walked up to join them, Ash called out in an amused tone. "You been at it all night?" Turning to look at his guests, the green-haired man stood up and chuckled while wiping his suit off. "Yes, I suppose we have been. Honestly, I wasn't even aware of the time until I saw the sun begin to rise." He then gestured up at Dragonite as they came to stand next to him at the cliffside. "I just had so many questions for Dragonite, and truly, it is an exceedingly intelligent Pokémon, well able to answer many more of the questions I had than I thought possible." Seeing Ash, Dragonite gave a happy-sounding coo and then leaned down to nuzzle its nose against him one more time, cheerfully eye-smiling all the while. "Draw-o! Draw-o!" As he was greeted by the skyscraper-sized marine drake, Ash laughed and hugged back as best he could. "Good morning to you too, Dragonite." Just as the embrace ended, Brock smiled and put his hands on his hips. "Well everyone, how about some breakfast before we hit the road? And that includes you too, Bill." While the declaration of breakfast had almost all their stomachs growling in tandem, Bill nodded gratefully. "That sounds wonderful, Brock, thank you." Ash reached down to his cloth belt and started to withdraw each Pokeball that held one of his current teammates. "Well guys, I recommend we let our Pokémon out for a while we wait." In agreement, they all released their Pokémon right there on the side of the windy cliffs, Bill's eyes lighting up as so many appeared before him at one time. Oh my, such healthy looking and well taken care of Pokémon. This really is a treat for a passionate researcher such as myself. While initially, all of the Pokémon seemed a little nervous at the sight of Dragonite towering high above them, Ash smiled and gestured up at it in a placating manner. Don't worry everyone, Dragonite is a friend. Why don't you come say hello and make it feel welcome? Seeing Brock, Misty and Giselle nodding in agreement, all of the Pokémon went up and started to introduce themselves, one after the other. Soon, they were all making conversation with Dragonite in Pokespeech, bringing visible joy to the loner Pokémon as it replied in kind to each of them. Suddenly, Pikachu ran right up Dragonite's arm, which it had resting on the cliffside, and sat down on its massive shoulder. Pika. Pika Pikachu Pika. Pikachu Pika. It almost seemed as though the two of them were old best buddies as the friendly and outgoing electric type began speaking animatedly to Dragonite with gestures of his small paws. In kind, the gentle giant cooed and softly grunted to the yellow mouse perched on its shoulder until, eventually, the two of them appeared to be in deep conversation. After a few minutes of allowing everyone to settle in, Ash took off the jacket portion of his tracksuit and called out to his Pokémon. Time to train guys. Bring it in. Hearing his trainer's call, Pikachu ended his conversation with Dragonite and then ran back down the length of its arm in order to obediently join his teammates for training. Dragonite stood where it was at the cliffside and watched with rapt interest as Ash and his Pokémon soon started to train in the grassy, open area right outside the lighthouse. While Brock had went inside to cook, Bill and the girls sat beside the door and watched them train, enjoying the already brightly shining sun all the while. About an hour later, Ash and his Pokémon were laying sprawled out on the ground in utter exhaustion. A usual occurrence for them after they were done training. Such a position really wasn't so much a luxury as it was a necessity. They were almost always unable to stand after training, even Ash, and would promptly fall to the ground within seconds of it ending. After finally regaining his breath and strength, Ash stood up, stretched and then praised his exhausted Pokémon before looking up at Dragonite. He could see the enraptured gleam in its satellite dish-sized eyes and smiled. Putting a hand to his chin in thought, he decided to act on the hunch he had and called up to the motionless dragon type. Hey Dragonite, you wanna show me one of your attacks? Eagerly and with eyes now shining in excitement, the enormous Pokémon nodded. Draw. Draw. Chuckling at its eagerness, Ash held his hand up for patience and then ran over to grab his Pokédex, which Giselle had along with his pack and other items. Once the black and red device was in hand, he hurried back over to the cliffside and pointed it up at Dragonite. As the Pokédex began to scan, Dexter's autonomous voice began to speak aloud the information it gleaned from its bio-observation. Pokédex entry number 149. Dragonite. The Dragon Pokémon. This Pokémon is known as the Sea Incarnate. Figureheads that resemble Dragonite decorate the bows of many ships. It is said to make its home somewhere in the sea. It guides wrecked ships to shore. This Dragonite is female and has the abilities Inner Focus and Multiscale. This Pokémon knows the moves Thunder Punch, Fire Punch, Roost, Thunder Wave, Slam, Twister and Dragon Rage. This particular Pokémon is far larger than other recorded members of its species and stands at a height of 105 feet tall. It weighs exactly 218,768 ibs or 99 tons. Ash gaped in shock at the info the Pokédex gave out. As did his friends and Bill. That is one huge Pokémon. Brock whistled in awe, having come out to let everyone know breakfast was ready. No kidding. Both Misty and Giselle spoke in perfect tandem. I knew Dragonite was immense, but hearing its exact measurement and size is completely astonishing. Bill exclaimed in unrestrained excitement. Ash looked back up at Dragonite after he put his Pokédex away and then smirked while pointing out to sea. Alright Dragonite, give me your Dragon Rage attack. The titanic dragon nodded and turned to face the ocean. Eyes narrowing and face contorting into an expression of deep concentration, she began building up a mass of brightly glowing energy in her stomach that soon made its way up into her now open mouth. After letting the spiraling, dark bluish energy build up for a few more moments, she reared her head back and then released it with a loud roar of "Draaaaaaa." A massive vortex of draconian energy exploded from Dragonite's mouth and shot across the ocean. The blazing beam of raw energy was so powerful and immense that when it finally hit the water it completely parted the waves, exposing the dry seafloor beneath. From there it went on, cutting a trail through the sea until it was out of sight into the horizon beyond. All of them could only stare in slack-jawed amazement at the power of the attack. And Misty was the one who so eloquently managed to stammer something that only partially did it justice. "Oh my. Arceus, that was unbelievable." Bill jammed both arms high into the air until it seemed like he was almost about to have an aneurysm in his excitement. "Oh dear me, that was amazing. Phenomenal. I've never seen such raw power before." Brock and Giselle were silent as stone while Ash gaped with wide eyes. The sea had been turned into a turbulent kettle of thick white foam and violently crashing waves when he finally looked up at the source of the unrest. "Dragonite, that was incredible. You're more powerful than I can even find a word to describe it. I mean, you're totally amazing." The bashful dragon type merely scratched the side of her neck with her claw, embarrassed at the glowing praise he showered upon her. And once the Pokémon all joined in and began cheering for her, it only made her embarrassment that much worse. When he finally returned to his senses, Brock jolted in place and remembered why he had come outside to begin with. "Oh, that's right. By the way, breakfast is ready, everybody." Since the excitement had dissipated enough for the others to hear his announcement, Ash, Misty, Giselle and Bill soon went inside to help Brock bring out all the food. Then, with the ocean as their backdrop, they laid out the healthy prepared breakfast of eggs, toast, oatmeal and fruit. Before everyone dug into their meal, Brock called all the Pokémon over and set their own bowls of food before them. He then looked up at Dragonite and offered a particularly large bowl of food to her. The biggest he could find in Bill's kitchen. "Here you go, Dragonite. I don't know what dragon-type Pokémon eats since I've never had one myself to cook for, but I did my best." Leaning down, the orange and cream-colored reptilian Pokémon gently took the bowl from Brock between two of her claws and brought it up to her nose. In a manner which was both cute and humorous, she sniffed it before tipping the contents of the bowl into her enormous mouth and eating it all in one go. Almost immediately her eyes lit up and she gave an exceedingly happy-sounding "Draw" to relay her enjoyment of the delicious food. Brock laughed upon seeing this. "Well, I'm glad you liked it." However, just as the spiky-haired young man prepared to return to his own breakfast, he was suddenly knocked flat to the ground by Dragonite, who couldn't keep herself from nuzzling him with her nose in a sign of gratitude. "Gah. Why, you're welcome. I see can make seconds. Ack. If you like, can't breath." He gasped while being pressed repeatedly into the ground by the joyful giant's boulder-sized snout. Of course, all the current spectacle did was cause the others to laugh at the former gym leader's plight. Although, when Dragonite finally let the now ruffled-looking teen clamber back to his feet and realized what she had done, she smiled sheepishly and scratched at her cheek with one of her claws. Even as Brock humorously tried to regain his breath and straighten himself up, all she could do was tilt her head to the side in a true display of her innocence and give a keening coo of rather obvious embarrassment. "Draw," which only further endeared everyone to her. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX eventually come to leave. Thus, with their supplies all packed up and their Pokémon returned, after they all had a chance to say goodbye to Dragonite, of course, Ash and his friends prepared to depart. The messy-haired boy walked up to Bill, who stood at the door of the lighthouse with Dragonite towering above the cliffside. "Well, Bill, thanks for everything." He bowed his head in a show of appreciation. It was great getting to meet and talk to you. I can see what Professor Oak meant by saying you really are a great person to learn from. Yeah, it's been great. Brock smiled in agreement. You were a great host, Bill. Thanks for everything. Talking to you was even better than one of the classes back at Pokémon Tech. Giselle I smiled in a manner befitting her sincere compliment. Yeah, you really know how to make anything about Pokémon really interesting, Bill. I definitely enjoyed myself. Misty rounded out the troop's unanimous agreement. The researcher himself only shook his head modestly. No, it is I who should be thanking all of you. If it wasn't for the four of you, then I would never have gotten to meet and become friends with Dragonite. She would have disappeared after Team Rocket attacked and I most likely never would have seen her again. Misty tilted her head and sweat dropped. Well, given that they probably wouldn't have shown up at all if we weren't here, then I'd say it's more of an even washout. Ash chuckled and nodded in agreement. Regardless, I'm still grateful, Bill. If we hadn't come, then I never would have gotten to meet Dragonite either. And she really is a great Pokémon. Looking up at the massive marine reptile herself, he noticed how morose and saddened she appeared. Her head was hung low and even her antennae were drooping. Hey, come on, girl. He smiled up at her softly, in an effort to console her. I know it's sad saying goodbye, but we'll meet again someday. I guarantee we will. She looked down at the boy and gave a sad coo in reply, though her spirits were no less dampened by their impending farewell. A great well of sadness was reflected in her eyes. Seeing this, Bill had the same thought pass through his mind as before, and this time, he spoke on it by turning and allowing a small smile to cross his lips. You know, Ash, he began, causing the boy to look at him. I believe Dragonite would be the happiest if she were to join you. While Ash and even his friends went wide-eyed hearing that, Pikachu's ears flicking in a sign of his own surprise, Dragonite's head quickly shot up. Even her antenna stood straight up in the air again. Well, I mean. Ash shook his head slowly as his brain registered Bill's words. Yeah, that would be totally great and I'd love to have her along, but. He then looked up at the gigantic evolved form of Dragonair. Dragonite, would you want to come along with me? She looked down at the much smaller human and, for a time, nothing happened. Then, in a rather unusual gesture, she lowered her head, almost as though she were bowing to him. She even gave a soft, low crooning sound that matched her strange motion. Well, I believe Ash just received his answer, and I must say, what an honor that was indeed. Truly, I have never seen that before. Bill observed, arms crossed as he watched the unfolding events with a knowing smile. What does it mean? Giselle looked at the experienced researcher for clarity. Without looking away, he began to explain in a factual manner. Dragon-type Pokémon are very proud and regal Pokémon. Add to that also the fact that Dragonite are pseudo-legendary Pokémon. For one to bow their head to a human as Dragonite just did is a sign of acceptance and respect. And considering her unique status, that makes it even more incredible. Bill nodded, as if agreeing with himself. Dragonite is essentially showing Ash that she is willing to accept him as her trainer if he so chooses to capture her. It is a true honor the way in which she chose to make known her decision. One in which Ash should feel very fortunate and humbled to have been given. Brock, Misty and Giselle all appeared amazed at Bill's explanation, while Ash, equally as flummoxed and yes, beyond humbled indeed, looked back up at the oversized evolved form of Dragonair. Is that true, Dragonite? Would you really accept me as your trainer? I mean, I've really not even been one all that long yet, are you sure? An intense and very serious light entered her eyes as Dragonite knelt her face down to his level and gave the boy a firm nod. It was more than apparent that she could care less how experienced he was. Supremely touched by her vote of confidence in him, Ash smiled and reached out to place a hand upon her snout. He then gave a grateful nod before looking back at Bill one more time. Are you sure about this, Bill? I mean, you've been wanting to meet Dragonite for so long, and now that you finally have, I don't want to feel like I'm taking her from you. The green-haired man smiled and walked over to Dragonite, where he began stroking the other side of her snout. No, Ash, Dragonite is not my Pokémon. She is a free spirit that I have been blessed enough to meet. He looked up at the illustrious giant Pokémon with great admiration in his eyes. I told you before that meeting her was enough for me. I didn't need to capture her. And I definitely never thought in a million years that I would actually become friends with her like I am now. That is more than enough for me, and it is what any Pokémon researcher dreams of accomplishing. Finally, he looked at Ash again. Being able to study Pokémon you are fascinated with and also befriend them at the same time is a dream come true. That is where my heart truly lies. He then went over and clapped the boy on the shoulder. You are training to become a Pokémon researcher also, Ash, and you will know these joys too. However, you mustn't forget, you are also a Pokémon trainer. And you will always be one. Bill gestured to the world around them. Trainers seek to capture and befriend new, special, and amazing Pokémon so that they may train them up to be the best they can possibly be. That is a natural outlook on life for any Pokémon trainer to have. He then pointed up at Dragonite specifically. She is a truly magnificent Pokémon, but yet, she also has much room to grow and learn. Under the right trainer I see her becoming a fantastic Pokémon, even more so than she is now. You are the trainer if there could ever be one for her, Ash, I know it. The boy in question lowered his head gratefully. Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate hearing your faith in me, it means a lot. He then looked back at his friends. What do you guys think? Believe I can do it? Brock was the first to respond. Training Dragonite will be far from an easy task, Ash. She is an incredibly powerful Pokémon and a pseudo-legendary to boot. Even elite trainers can have problems raising Pokémon like her. He nodded toward his friend. But, if any new trainer could ever raise a Pokémon like Dragonite, I believe it would be you, Ash. I've seen enough already to have faith in you. I agree with Brock, Ash. Misty spoke up. It won't be easy, but I know you can do it. Giselle nodded in agreement. Yes, Ash, I believe in you too. I know you can raise Dragonite. Pika Pikachu Pika Pie. Pikachu looked down at his trainer from his shoulder perch and gestured animatedly with his small but strong little arms. He had all the faith in his human best friend possible, and it was Pikachu's unintelligible words that sealed the deal for Ash. So highly did he consider the small electric type's counsel. Thanks, buddy. He smiled up at his first Pokémon. If you believe in me, then what else do I need? Offering a grateful smile to his friends as well, the young man turned back to Dragonite and placed his hands on his hips. Well, Dragonite, everyone else has faith in me to do this. Do you? His simple reply was getting nuzzled softly by her and receiving a small coo of affection. He smiled and nodded at her non-verbal response before holding up his hand. Okay then, I just have a couple of things to go over first. She listened attentively as he began. We're going to train you to get stronger and get to know one another better too. But you have to understand that because of how big you are, there aren't going to be many battles I'll be able to use you in. Dragonite nodded her head back and forth, cooing in such a manner as though such a thing was already rather obvious to her. Secondly, I won't have you with me all the time. I'll be switching my Pokémon around so they can all have time to travel and be with me. A fond smile crossed his lips. But, you'll be going to stay back home where I come from with a really nice man named Professor Oak. He's like family to me and he'll help to take care of you when you're with him, just like he does for my other Pokémon. It's a really nice place and I know you'll love it there. Ash then rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled sheepishly. Lastly, you're gonna have to bear with me it comes to feeding you. I think I might have an idea how to fill you up since I know you must have a massive appetite, but I'm going to need to play around with it. So if the food doesn't taste all that great at first, just try and be patient with me, okay? In an amused manner, Dragonite Eye smiled and made a sound that almost seemed like she were laughing at him. Although, the nod she gave bore witness to the fact that she agreed and understood his words. Exhaling slowly, excitement running through him at the major catch he was about to make, Ash smiled up at her. All right then, you ready? Showing a similar enthusiasm, Dragonite nodded eagerly, which caused him to grab an empty Pokeball and hold it up. Though he merely blinked at it for a moment before murmuring to himself. I hope this little thing can actually hold her, guess we'll see. With that said and all eyes watching in anticipation, he reared back and threw the ball as high as he could into the air. Welcome to the family Dragonite. With the happiest sounding wail they had heard from her yet, the massive Pokémon reached out and touched the tiny ball with one claw. As soon as she did this, Ash's concerns were put to rest as the ball dutifully popped open. Before everyone's eyes, Dragonite's whole body began to glow bright red before, in an astounding display of technological wonder, her towering form was immediately sucked inside of the much smaller Pokeball. The spherical device fell back to the earth and Ash smoothly caught it in his hand. There, it rocked several times in his palm, as though Dragonite were adjusting to her new accommodations in the pocket dimension, before it went still, a bright burst of stars hailing a successful capture. However, seeing the black and white ball beginning to glow, Ash was reminded that he already had 6 Pokémon with him since he had forgotten to send Firo back to the lab the previous night as he intended. Thus, to keep her from teleporting away, Ash hurriedly pulled his Pokédex out, as well as Firo's own Pokeball, and made the transfer as quickly as he could. Thankfully, he did so just at the right time and kept Dragonite's Pokeball from disappearing. After the deed had been done, everyone just stared at the spot where the colossal Dragonite had once stood and then at the Pokeball in Ash's hand where she was now safely being held. In that very same moment, the magnitude of the moment really hit them all. Ash just captured a Dragonite. Misty breathed in disbelief. A giant Dragonite. Giselle added with a wide blink. I knew I would see amazing things when I left home to start this journey of my own, but. Brock chuckled and shook his head. I never would have expected to see something like this. I'm just glad he didn't have Dragonite when he battled me at the gym. Bill walked up to stand at the cliffside, staring out at the wide open ocean where Dragonite had once roamed aimlessly but never would again. It truly is amazing. The Pokémon who once had no friends, who was a lone wanderer, now has a home. Seeing what I have just now, this is what being a Pokémon researcher is all about. Pikachu looked down at the Pokeball in Ash's hand while his trainer did the same. We just captured a Dragonite, a huge Dragonite, this almost doesn't seem real, does it? Pikachu shook his head. Pika. The boy smiled and then looked at his first true Pokémon friend. Everything's getting more and more intense, Pikachu. But you know what? Together, with our friends and new family members like Dragonite, I know we can handle whatever comes our way. The adorable yellow mascot of Team Ketchum showed his voluminous personality once again by eye-smiling and holding up his small little paw. Pikachu Pika Pie. As long as Pikachu was around, Ash knew he could handle anything their journey brought their way. And training Dragonite would be no different. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX to Vermilion City. Bill was present to see them off, standing as he was before the lighthouse. My friends, he began while casting his eyes and a smile over them all. I am truly grateful for having the chance to meet you. This has been an adventure in its own right. I got to achieve one of my most coveted desires and met a Pokémon I never thought I would get the chance to see. Moreover, I was fortunate enough to witness that very same Pokémon finally find a home. This is an experience I will never forget. He then shook hands with each of the younger travelers, Brock, Misty and Giselle, giving their own words of farewell to him before Ash finally came last. Thank you for everything, Bill. I promise I'll take good care of Dragonite. The older man smiled and shook the rookie trainer's hand firmly. I know you will, Ash, and I wish you both the brightest of futures together. Professor Oak was right to speak so highly of you. He then stepped back and addressed all of them as a whole. Farewell, all of you, and the best of luck in your journeys, as well as each of your individual endeavors. I feel certain we shall meet again. With those last words spoken, the 4 traveling Pokémon trainers turned and set off down the road with the sea at their backs. They were heading for their next destination and their next adventure, but what they would encounter next, no one knew. All that was for certain was that, whatever they faced, they each knew they could handle whatever it was as long as they had each other, their friendship and their unyielding passion for their dreams. And of course, having a 100-foot Dragonite on your side never hurt your chances either.